fat daughter was given to a black slave as punishment by her father, but he loved her like no one ever. Today's story is powerful, painful, and beautiful. Let me know from where you are listening from, and if this story moves you, like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let's begin. The first sound of the morning was the creak of the floorboards beneath Clementine Rosewell's bed. Not birdsong, not the rustle of cottonwood leaves, just wood straining under her. She paused before rising, holding her breath like she always did, waiting to hear if her father was already stomping around downstairs, if she could move without being seen, without being weighed in glances and sighs and long silences that said too much, too wide, too slow. The mirror caught her in passing. She looked away. In the corner of the room, an old music box, cracked and half-dusted, sat untouched on the windowsill. Her mother's. She hadn't opened it in years. The lid was carved with small forget-me-nots, and an inscription nearly rubbed smooth. "May your song outlive your silence." Her father said it was a waste of wood. Everything that didn't serve a purpose was a waste in Ransom Rosewell's house. And Clementine? She'd been declared useless the day her curves refused to become corset-thin, and her smile failed to attract suitors at 15. "Can't even give you away," her father had muttered once, not realizing she stood behind him. Or maybe he had. By the time the rooster crowed a second time, she was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, bread in the oven, sweat on her brow. She moved quickly, not gracefully, but with the muscle of someone used to carrying more than she should. The kind of girl who learned to bend under weight rather than break. At 7 sharp, her father entered without looking at her. He never looked at her. He looked at the table, the food, the way the chairs were arranged. Then he grunted. "Josiah's coming back today," he said, cutting into the bread with a knife far too sharp for the task. "I expect no delays." She froze. "Josiah? Booker?" Her father raised his eyes, cold, slate gray, with the same judgmental flair he reserved for storm clouds and tax collectors. "You know another?" She didn't reply. She just nodded and retreated to the sink, scrubbing dishes that didn't need washing. Josiah Booker, a man she'd only seen twice. Once, from the barn as he fixed a wagon axle without words, his back gleaming with sweat and lashes. And once more, years ago, when he was led in shackled and led out bloodied, a price paid for another man's broken plow. He was a former slave. Former, her father had stressed, as if freedom was a status easily won. But everyone knew he stayed on because no one else would hire him. And Ransom paid him in food and scraps of land no one wanted. Now he was coming back, and for reasons she didn't understand, Clementine's stomach turned not with fear, but with something colder, a premonition. That evening, the first clouds in weeks rolled in low and heavy. Clementine was on the porch, rocking slowly in a chair too small for her hips, mending a shirt with hands that had become steady through necessity. Not grace. She heard the wagon before she saw it, and then there he was. Tall, still, dark as old cedar, with shoulders like railroad beams and eyes that didn't flicker when they met hers. Josiah stepped off the wagon, nodded once toward the porch, then turned to unload a sack of cornmeal from the back. He wore no hat, no smile, no chains. But he carried something in his silence, something deeper than bitterness, a sort of noble emptiness, the kind carved out by survival, not hatred. Clementine held her breath. He walked past her, brushing only wind and tension, then disappeared around the house to the back shed. No words, but something passed between them. Something that didn't require speaking. Later that night, she found the shirt he'd dropped beside the well, ripped and caked in dry mud. She picked it up, her fingers brushing a stitched patch over the left breast. Faded letters. BCF. Too worn to read clearly. She washed it anyway, hung it on the line. And as it dried in the moonlight, she sat beneath the clothesline, wondering what it meant that a man like him, scarred, silent, alone, had more presence than any suitor her father ever mentioned, and why, for the first time in her life, she wanted to be seen. The next morning, her father called her into the study. A dark, wooden room where the smell of tobacco and leather bound every breath in judgment. "I made a decision," he said. She waited. "You've become a burden, Clementine." Her hands curled around the folds of her apron. She didn't cry, Not this time. You eat more than you earn. You scare off men with your size. You embarrass me at Sunday gatherings, and I'm tired of it. Still, she said nothing. I've arranged something. This time her throat went dry. You'll live out back, with Josiah. You'll cook for him, clean, serve his space, and you'll stay out of this house. Her mouth parted. Pa, you wanted your own space? There it is. I'm giving you to him. The words fell like bricks. Not as a wife. Don't be foolish. He doesn't want you. But he's earned something. And I'm done feeding mouths that don't bring me return. You can't give me away, she whispered, numb, but he already turned back to his desk. In Ransom Rosewell's eyes, she was nothing more than livestock traded down the river. That night, she didn't scream, she didn't protest. She walked, her few belongings bundled into a flour sack. She stepped out of the house barefoot and crossed the dirt yard, toward the shed behind the tobacco field where Josiah stayed. The sky rumbled. Thunder, maybe. He was sitting on the step sharpening a blade when she arrived. He didn't look surprised. Got sent to live here, she said, voice dull. He said nothing. She set her sack down. I'll stay out the way. He stood slowly. That's not how this gonna work. Her stomach clenched. You sleep inside. I sleep on the porch. You take the bed. I don't need it. You're not property, Miss Clementine, not mine, not his. He stepped back, holding the door open for her. No one had ever opened a door for her before. She stepped inside, and the rain began to fall. The shed wasn't a shed. Not really. Inside it was clean. Sparse, but there was a quiet dignity to how Josiah kept it. Tools arranged by size, a quilt folded near the hearth, wood stacked neat in rows like they'd been placed by someone who still believed order was a kind of prayer. The bed, though worn, had fresh straw. There was no smell of rot or sweat, only pine and ash, and above the mantel hung something Clementine didn't expect, a sketch, charcoal on parchment, faded and pinned with nails, a woman's face, soft, strong, eyes turned upward like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Josiah saw her looking. My mama, he said quietly. Drew her from memory. She didn't know what to say. He handed her a folded blanket and gestured to the bed. I'll be out front. You knock if you need. She blinked. You're sleeping outside? He nodded. Ain't gonna make you feel caged. Why are you being kind to me? Her voice cracked. He looked at her then. Really looked. Ain't nobody kind to you in a while, huh? She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. That night, Clementine lay awake long after the fire burned low. The wind howled through the chinks in the wall, and the storm outside sounded like something trying to tear its way in. But she wasn't cold. She stared at the ceiling, heart pounding in a way she didn't understand, because for the first time in her life a man had looked at her and not flinched. Not with hunger, not with mockery, just saw her. She wasn't ready for that. 3 days passed. Word spread fast in Mercy Hollow. The Rosewell girl had been given to the Negro. Not married. Not hired out. Given, and in a town where women were worth their waist in marriage contracts, Clementine became a pariah overnight. The whispers came first. Then the stares. Then the snickering. She bore it, like she always did. But Josiah? He stayed silent, until the day the butcher's son spat on her dress. And Josiah grabbed him by the collar and held him off the ground. You best remember your mama before you open your mouth again, he growled. The boy pissed himself. And no one spat after that. But something inside Clementine had already cracked. She ran that night, not far. Just to the edge of the cornfield, where the trees bent low and the crickets sang like they didn't know what sorrow was. She collapsed to her knees, hands clutching her sides, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Why me? She gasped. Why am I the one everybody shames? I never did nothing to no one. Behind her, a voice. You carry more light than they know. She turned. Josiah stood beneath the tree, moonlight slicing across his face. I ain't light, she spat. I'm heavy, big, ugly. I've been called it all my life. You heavy 'cause you carry what they throw. He stepped closer. But you still stand. That broke her. She buried her face in his chest, and he let her cry. Didn't touch her, didn't move, just stood there like a lighthouse, tall, unshaken, while she collapsed like waves against him. 1 week later, Clementine woke to the sound of laughter. Not hers. Children. She crept outside and found Josiah with 3 black boys, and a little girl near the garden, teaching them how to stack stones in a circle. The oldest called him Uncle Joe. The smallest, barefoot and wild-eyed, ran up to Clementine and touched her dress. "You the lady who lives with Uncle Joe?" she asked. Clementine nodded, awkward. "You cook good," the girl said. "He ain't been grumpy since you came." Josiah looked up, caught her eye, smiled. That night he brought in a small wooden box. He set it down on the table. "You fix things," he said. "Maybe you can fix this." It was a music box. Her music box. He'd found it in the trash pile behind the Rosewell house. Her father had tossed it after she left. She stared at it, hands trembling. The lid was cracked, the hinge broken. But the carving, "May your song outlive your silence," was still there. She took it gently, like a mother cradling a wounded child, and for the first time, Clementine wept not from shame, but from being seen. Then came the fire. It started with Sheriff Danton Griggs, a man who fancied himself a moral compass, but kept his needle pointed to wherever power paid. He'd come to the shed one night, hat in hand, false sympathy dripping from his voice. "Miss Clementine, you don't belong out here. This ain't proper. This ain't Southern." Josiah stood beside her, arms crossed. "She belong where she's safe," Josiah said. Griggs narrowed his eyes. "There's laws. There's men who hide behind 'em." The sheriff left, but the next morning, the shed's back wall was torched. Someone poured oil and lit a match. Josiah got them out in time. Beat the flames back with his coat, but half the room burned. Clementine's music box melted in the heat. She held the ruined piece in her lap. Blackened wood still warm, and she didn't cry. She just stared at the embers. "I won't leave," she said. Josiah knelt beside her. "I didn't ask you to." That night, beneath the black sky, he kissed her. Not with fire, not with lust, with reverence, with apology, with the slow, unsure gentleness of a man who'd been taught his touch could destroy. And she kissed him back like she'd been waiting a lifetime. The fire left more than ashes. It left a choice. Clementine could have gone crawling back to the main house, tail between her legs, hands folded like a good girl begging for forgiveness from the man who broke her. But instead, she took a hammer and helped Josiah rebuild, one beam at a time. They slept under the stars for 3 nights. Josiah fashioned a tarp lean-to with scavenged canvas and hay. They lay back to back, not touching, but tethered by something deeper than skin. On the 4th night, Clementine sat up suddenly. "I want to plant something," she whispered. He turned, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Like a garden?" She nodded. "A real one. Something that needs me to grow." Josiah propped himself on an elbow, studying her face. "You ever planted before?" "No, but I've been buried." He smiled, not wide, not mocking, just proud. "You got dirt in your veins already." A week later, the land behind the rebuilt shack was dry and unforgiving, but Josiah taught her how to read it, how to water just enough without drowning the roots, how to turn compost into gold, how to see green not just as color, but as promise. They planted tomatoes, peppers, beans, and sunflowers. Clementine insisted on sunflowers. "They always turn to the light," she said. "Even when it's behind clouds." She worked with sleeves rolled high, arms sunburned, dress smeared with soil, and Josiah watched her from the porch sometimes. Not with hunger, but with reverence, like a man watching a sunrise he never believed he'd see. Then came Sunday. They walked to town together. Not hand in hand, but side by side. And Mercy Hollow froze. The church doors, normally wide open, closed just as they approached. The bell fell silent. Inside, Preacher Kane coughed awkwardly and motioned for the choir to sing louder. Clementine's hand trembled at her side. Josiah didn't flinch. They turned and walked to the general store instead. Inside, silence. Then whispers. Then laughter. "Careful, Clemma," one of the townswomen sneered. "You'll sweat on the apples." Clementine turned, face hot. "Better sweat than venom," the woman blinked. Josiah paid for the bread and soap, and they walked out with heads high. That night, Clementine stood at the edge of the garden, hands on her hips, eyes stinging. "You ever think maybe I am a burden?" she asked. Josiah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over, knelt by the tallest sunflower, and gently traced the leaves. "This one almost died last week," he said. "Drought, fungus, and you saved it." He nodded. Why? He stood slowly, because even when the others turned away from it, this one kept reaching for the sky. She turned toward him. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes said everything. A few days later, Clementine received a letter in her old apron pocket. No stamp. No return. Just her name in sharp handwriting. She opened it in the shed while Josiah worked outside. Inside, you shame your family. Your mother is rolling in her grave. This is your final warning. She read it twice, folded it neatly, burned it in the hearth. When Josiah came in, she didn't mention it, but he knew something had shifted. That night she touched his face, traced the old scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. Who did this? She asked. He hesitated. Then, a man who thought he owned me. Long time ago. She leaned closer. And the one on your back? He didn't answer, so she kissed it, soft, just once, as if saying, you're not what they did to you. He turned to her and whispered, I ain't never been held like that before. Neither had she. A month passed. The garden bloomed, the shack became a home. Even the townsfolk, some of them, grew quiet. Respectful, even. They couldn't deny that Josiah's crops were the strongest, that Clementine's pickled peppers outsold every jar in the market. She carried herself taller now, still large, but no longer hiding. She even wore color. Blue, mostly, her mother's favorite. And Josiah? He carved a wooden plaque above the door. Mercy, remade. But not everyone wanted peace. Ransom Rosewell returned one morning, drunk, staggering, hat in hand but venom in his eyes. You owe me, he told Josiah. Clementine stepped between them. No, he don't. Ransom blinked at her, like he didn't recognize his own child. You fat, useless thing, he hissed. You think you're free? I know I am. He raised a hand. Josiah caught it mid-air and squeezed. Go, Josiah said. Ransom backed away, but not before spitting at the ground. This ain't over. That night, Clementine couldn't sleep. Josiah sat on the porch, whittling quietly. She joined him. You think he'll come back? She asked. He nodded. Men like him don't know how to let go. She leaned her head on his shoulder. But I ain't running, she whispered. He looked down at her. You never were. The market was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Normally, Saturdays in Mercy Hollow were a whirl of wagons and gossip. Deals struck over bushels and bruised pride. But as Clementine walked with her basket full of preserves and green beans, folks parted like she was a sickness. She saw them whispering. Not behind hands, but open now. Bold. See how he lets her walk ahead? She walks like she owns the place. Disgusting. She gripped the basket tighter. Josiah trailed behind, carrying a crate of corn, eyes forward. Calm. Always calm. But Clementine? She was shaking. Not with shame, with fury. At the produce stall, she set her goods down beside old Mr. Cantor's tomatoes. The store clerk, Millie Garth, stepped forward and blocked her. We don't want your things here. Clementine blinked. What? Folk complained. Say you two been bringing sin into this town. Say you're spreading corruption. Clementine's voice dropped. You mean love? Millie leaned in. I mean filth. Josiah stepped beside her. Let's go, he said, but Clementine didn't move. Her hands clutched the jar of strawberry jam like a weapon. And then Millie did something she'd regret forever. She knocked the basket from Clementine's hands. Jars shattered on the dirt. Red seeping like blood. Gasps all around. Clementine stared at the broken glass, the jam that now looked like spilt organs. And something inside her snapped. She stepped forward, into Millie's space. I was fat when I was born, she said loudly. Too big for this town. Too loud for its church. Too soft for its men. People stopped. But you know what? I'm still here. I've buried shame in every inch of this body. I've eaten bitterness like bread, and I survived. Her voice rose. You hate him, she pointed to Josiah, because he never bowed to your pity, because he don't need your table to be a man. A silence spread through the square like gunpowder, then a voice. Earl Plimpton, a shopkeeper. Get that woman out of here. Others joined in. Run her off. She's shaming us. Call the sheriff. Josiah stepped forward, hand on her back. Now, he said, but it was too late. Sheriff Griggs emerged from the post office, badge gleaming, mustache twitching. Josiah Booker, he barked. You're under arrest. For what? Clementine shouted. Disturbing peace, inciting rebellion, cohabiting in sin with a white woman. He stepped forward, pulling out cuffs. Josiah didn't resist, but Clementine grabbed the sheriff's wrist. You touch him, she hissed, and you answer to me. Griggs sneered. Girl, you weigh more than the law. Don't mean it bends for you. And that's when she slapped him. Not gently, not ladylike. A full, stinging slap that echoed off the walls of every building in town. Gasps. A pause. Then, Griggs yanked Josiah forward and snapped the cuffs on him. Boy's going to the jailhouse, he spat. You best pray he don't hang. That night, Clementine paced the garden like a caged lion. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't think. The shack felt too quiet. Too empty. She picked up the old music box, warped from the fire, and held it close. It didn't play anymore, but she could still hear the melody in her mind. May your song outlive your silence. She wouldn't be silent, not anymore. The next day, she marched to the courthouse, in a blue dress with sunflowers stitched along the hem. Hair braided, eyes fire. She banged the gavel herself. Folks stared as she climbed the steps. I want a hearing, she shouted. On the record, about Josiah Booker. No woman speaks here, said the deputy. She stared him down. Then you're just scared of a voice that carries more truth than your guns. The hearing. It wasn't a trial, not formally. But the room filled up fast. Town council. Merchants. Even Preacher Kane. Clementine stood alone. I'm here to say that man's done more good for this land than any of you. Laughter. She raised her voice. He built that garden behind our home. He feeds children who don't look like him. He saved my life when y'all left me to rot. The preacher stood. You've sinned, Miss Rosewell. You've shacked up with a man who ain't your kind. Clementine turned, eyes burning. You mean a kind man? More murmurs. She pulled out the burned music box and held it high. My mama used to say music comes from what's broken. You wind it tight enough, even a crack will sing. She paused. I am cracked, but I sing now. The verdict. They didn't free Josiah, but they released him to house arrest, pending moral supervision. He walked out of that jail like a man walking through fire. Slow, quiet, unbent, and Clementine was waiting. She didn't hug him. She took his hand. In front of everyone. Back at home, they sat on the porch. The garden swayed behind them. I'm sorry, she said. Josiah shook his head. You brought thunder to their silence. She looked at him. They still hate us. They'll always hate something they don't understand. He looked out at the horizon. But they heard you. Summer arrived like a heavy hand. The garden burst into color. Fat tomatoes, tall stalks of corn, peppers red as blood and gold as fire. Clementine moved through it every morning with bare feet and a woven basket, humming softly. She was no longer the girl who flinched from mirrors, no longer the daughter Ransom Rosewell claimed as burden. She was her own, and Josiah. He watched her with the quiet awe of a man who knew how fragile joy could be. They ate by lantern light each night. Stew, bread, garden greens, sweet tea. Their table was small, but it felt like a kingdom. Sometimes Josiah would recite scripture, not in a preacher's cadence, but in a storyteller's whisper. One night, Clementine asked, You ever think about leaving? He paused, spoon mid-air. You mean Mercy Hollow? She nodded. Where would I go? Anywhere. He looked out toward the darkness beyond the window. I ain't free everywhere. Just here. Just with you. That Sunday, they didn't go to church. Instead, they turned the shack into one. Not with hymns, but with healing. A group of children, half black, half white, all poor, came to the garden with empty pails and tired eyes. Clementine gave them food. Josiah taught them how to turn soil, how to read weather by the wind. One boy, Jasper, said, My mama says you're the devil. Clementine knelt. Does she now? He nodded. But I don't think you are. The devil don't feed nobody. She smiled and kissed the top of his dusty head. Word spread. The shack became a symbol. The same townsfolk who tried to burn it now watched from their porches in silence as Clementine handed out seeds, and Josiah offered lessons. It wasn't charity. It was dignity. A second chance grown from dirt and ruin. Then came Ransom. He didn't knock, just barged in one morning with dust on his boots and rage in his eyes. Clementine froze mid-stir. Josiah stood slowly from the corner. Ransom looked older, eyes sunken, voice brittle. I've come to make a deal, he said. No deals left to make, Clementine said. not turning from the stove. "You've shamed this family, turned our name to mud. But I've got a way to fix it." She finally faced him. "I ain't broken anymore, Pa. I don't need fixing." He sneered. "There's a man in Masonville, rich cattleman. He's willing to overlook your condition. Says he'll marry you if I sweeten the pot with land and livestock. You're selling me again?" she asked, softly. "I'm giving you a future." Josiah stepped forward. "She already got one." Ransom turned. "You don't speak here, boy." "I speak wherever I bleed." The air thickened, but Clementine raised her voice before things could turn. "You used to say I was a burden. Now I'm worth cattle and a field. That's progress, I guess." Ransom stepped toward her. But Josiah moved between them, and for a second, just one, Ransom faltered. Because Josiah didn't raise a fist, he simply said, "Go," and for once, Ransom did. That night, the garden shimmered under moonlight. Josiah and Clementine walked the rows in silence. She stopped beside the tallest sunflower, now taller than her. "You ever wonder what makes things grow?" she asked. He looked at her. "Time," he said. "Light. Patience." And he touched her hand. "Love." She stared at him. "I don't know what love feels like," she whispered. "Not real love. Not the kind that stays." He leaned in. "You'll know it when it don't need words." And he kissed her. Not soft this time. Not hesitant, but like a man sure of what he planted. 2 weeks later, Mercy Hollow changed. Slightly. Slowly. The sheriff stopped spitting near their property. Preacher Kane stopped using their names in sermons. And Clementine? She spoke at the schoolhouse, telling girls they weren't broken for being big, or loud, or unchosen. She brought jars of preserved peaches and tomato jam to the widows down the hill. She wrote letters to herself in her mother's handwriting. Until one day, she didn't need to anymore. Because she believed the words without the trick. Then came the note, pinned to the front door with a rusty nail. No name, just a message. N-word don't get happy endings, and neither do the pigs who bet 'em. Clementine read it aloud. Josiah didn't flinch, but something in his eyes went cold. "We need to prepare," he said. "For what? For what always comes when they can't kill you quietly." That night, Josiah began keeping a rifle near the door. Not because he wanted to shoot, but because he'd promised Clementine something more powerful than love. Safety. The first fire was small, a pile of dry twigs smoldering behind the tool shed. Josiah stamped it out before it caught the wall. No damage. No note this time, but the message was clear, and it came with silence from the town, the kind of silence that smells like smoke before the sky turns orange. They didn't sleep that night. Clementine sat on the edge of the bed, the shotgun across her lap. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. She had run out of tears a long time ago. Josiah sat beside her, elbow on his knee, sharpening the same knife he always did when he couldn't pray. "You think it's them again?" she asked. He didn't answer, because they both knew it was. 3 days passed, and then it happened. Just after midnight, Clementine woke to the sound of glass shattering below. She bolted upright. Josiah was already at the door, barefoot and shirtless, holding the rifle. "Stay here," he whispered, but she followed. Out the door, down the steps, and into a night lit red. The cellar, where they stored jars and tools, was ablaze. Flames licking up the back wall of the shack, smoke curling under the eaves, and 3 figures running into the woods. Josiah didn't shoot. He could have. He didn't. Instead, he grabbed the water barrel, dumped it on the fire, stomped the rest out with bare feet. Clementine joined him, coughing through smoke, batting at embers. Together they saved what they could. The shack held. But the cellar, gone. They collapsed on the porch steps, soot covering their skin like war paint. Clementine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm tired of surviving," she whispered. "I know. I want to live." He didn't answer, just held her hand, tight. The next morning, they found the sign, painted across the side of the well in blood-red letters. No more mixing. Sheriff Griggs came out only after Josiah rode into town and demanded it. The lawman took one look and said, "Boys being boys." Josiah stared at him. "Boys?" Griggs spat. "You didn't die. Consider it a warning." Josiah didn't speak again. He simply turned and walked away, but something had shifted in his stride. A weight. A question. A line being crossed. That evening, Clementine returned to the Rosewell estate. She hadn't set foot on the porch since she'd been cast out. Ransom wasn't home, but she didn't come to see him. She came for the cellar, the old one beneath the main house, sealed for years. She had remembered something, a voice, her mother's voice. If ever the world burns around you, there's still a song waiting in the dark. She pried open the old root door and crept down, lantern in hand. Dust, cobwebs, rot, but beneath a floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside a tea tin, a journal. Maybelline Rosewell's handwriting. That night, Clementine read every page by candlelight. And she wept, because her mother had known, had loved a man who wasn't her husband, had suffered in silence, had dreamed of running, but hadn't, because of Clementine. I stayed because I feared what they'd do to you if I left, one page said, but I prayed you'd one day find the strength to do what I couldn't. Clementine turned the last page. Inside was a dried flower, a sunflower. She walked out into the yard barefoot, holding the book to her chest. Josiah was chopping wood by moonlight, shirtless, sweat gleaming. She stood before him and said, I want to be yours. He lowered the axe. I thought you already were. She shook her head. I want it spoken. A pause. A breath. Then he dropped the axe and stepped forward. And without ceremony or witness or ring, he whispered, Then you are. Later that night, they lay together in the bed they had rebuilt with their own hands. No thunder, no fire, no shame, just warmth. And the soft hush of two bodies finally at peace. After, Clementine looked at the ceiling and whispered, Do you believe in fate? Josiah kissed her shoulder. I believe in seeds. You plant right, love right, water right, things bloom. She smiled. I think my mother planted me. He nodded. And I'm still blooming. Mercy Hollow had a way of smiling while sharpening its knives. The fire in the cellar hadn't made the paper, but the gossip spread, quietly, with narrowed eyes and sideways glances. Some said the Rosewell girl had bewitched the slave. Others whispered that Josiah Booker had taken what wasn't his. But the truth sat in a drawer at the sheriff's office, folded, fading, fragile as bone. Josiah's freedom papers. The visit. Clementine stood at the jailhouse steps, fists clenched at her sides. Josiah had gone to town for nails and didn't return. Now, 4 hours later, the sun sinking low, the bars of the holding cell cast shadows like cage wires across his face. Sheriff Griggs stood in the corner, chewing tobacco with smug contentment. Papers don't prove nothin', he said. They're signed, Clementine replied. He spit into a cup. Sure, but by who? A dead man? A northern judge? He leaned in close. This town don't honor ghost signatures. Clementine stared at him. You forge this charge and I swear I'll burn your world from the roots. Griggs chuckled. You're fat, girl. Not dangerous. Then she stepped forward and slapped him. Again, harder this time. Let him out, she said, trembling. He laughed. Or what? You'll bake me to death? She turned on her heel and walked straight to the newspaper office. The next day, it hit every doorstep in town. A full column. He grew a garden, and they tried to chain him anyway, by Clementine Rosewell. It told Josiah's story. Every word, every scar, the truth about how he stayed after freedom because no one else would feed him, how he rebuilt a burnt shack and fed poor children of both colors, how he loved without asking permission. It quoted scripture, it named names, and it included a scanned copy of his freedom papers. Sheriff Griggs tried to have it pulled, but the paperboy doubled his deliveries that day. That evening, someone threw a brick through their window. Wrapped in cloth, on it, you think print makes a man free? But it wasn't just hate that came, because the next morning, Martha Dorr, the widow of a Confederate soldier, brought a bushel of apples to their door, said nothing. Just left them there. Then 3 schoolgirls dropped off hand-drawn letters with flowers and hearts. Your garden is our favorite place, one note read. Even Preacher Kane, shamefaced, nodded at them from across the road as he passed on his wagon. The town was dividing, but some began choosing light. Then came the judge. Circuit Judge Harlan Whitcomb arrived in a dusty carriage 2 days later. A northern man with sun-browned skin and a Bible in his coat pocket. I heard there's a man in chains who shouldn't be, he said at the courthouse. Josiah stood tall beside Clementine as she read from her mother's journal, detailing how Maybelline Rosewell had once taught Josiah to read in secret behind the barn, before she'd been forced to stop by Ransom. The courtroom held its breath. Sheriff Griggs fidgeted. Judge Whitcomb took the stand and unfolded Josiah's freedom papers with gloved hands, examined them, ran his fingers over the ink. Then he looked up. "These papers," he said, voice calm but firm, "are valid." A pause. "And this man," he nodded at Josiah, "is free, was free, and will remain free under law and under heaven." The gavel came down, one clean knock. And in that moment, something broke in Mercy Hollow. Something old and rotten and born of hate. Outside the courthouse, no one cheered. But Clementine caught the eye of a little boy across the road. He smiled, then waved, and she knew. The next generation had seen what happened today. That night, back at the shack, the garden glowed silver in the moonlight. Josiah sat at the edge of the porch, whittling a figure of a sunflower from pine. Clementine stepped behind him, wrapped her arms around his chest. "Freedom looks good on you," she said. He smiled, still carving. "And you," he said, "look like the answer to a prayer I forgot I asked." She kissed his neck, soft, and in that silence, with no law looming, no noose waiting, they made love like it meant something sacred, because it did. The garden never looked greener. Summer was at its peak. Fat tomatoes splitting open on the vine, bees drunk on pollen, and the sound of children laughing somewhere behind the sunflower rows. Mercy Hollow was still watching, but fewer with malice now, more with uncertainty, and a handful with hope. But the past never stays buried, and sometimes it rides back into town, with a bottle in one hand and a secret in the other. Ransom returns. He showed up late, just after sundown, dust on his boots, whiskey on his breath, a leather satchel in one hand, and an unfamiliar glint in his eye. Clementine was on the porch when she saw him stagger up the road. Josiah stepped beside her, silent. Ransom stopped at the gate and leaned on the post like it pained him to stand upright. "You got a minute?" he asked, voice hoarse. Clementine didn't answer. He took that as a yes. They sat at opposite ends of the porch. Josiah didn't move far, just enough to keep watch from the shadows. Ransom pulled out a letter from the satchel. Old. Yellowed. The seal broken. "This came after your mama died," he said, sliding it across the table. "I never gave it to you." "Why not?" Clementine asked, voice like stone. "Because I'm a damn coward," no one corrected him. He lit a cigarette with shaky hands. She wrote it before she passed. Said if I didn't do right by you, I should give this when I no longer feared the mirror. Clementine picked it up, but didn't open it. Yet. She wasn't just sick, Ransom said. She was leaving. That caught her off guard. He looked away, found a satchel by the door, packed. "Letter for you. Letter for me. And one for him." Josiah looked up. "I tore them all up." He took a long drag from the cigarette. "She loved him, you know. Not like lust. I mean real. Like he was water and I was dust." Clementine said nothing. Ransom laughed bitterly. "You know what's worse than being hated, Clem? Being ignored. And your mama didn't look at me the way she did him. Not for years." He rubbed his face. "So I made sure she couldn't leave." Silence. "What do you mean?" Clementine asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I told the doctor not to treat her." Josiah stood. Ransom looked up at him, eyes rimmed red. "I told him she weren't worth the effort. I let her waste away." No one breathed. And then Ransom said the thing that burned the rest of the world down. "I did it to hurt her. And to hurt you." Clementine rose, walked into the shack, came back with her father's old six-shooter, unloaded, rusty. She set it on the porch between them. "I don't want your apology," she said. "I ain't got one." She nodded. "Then take this. And leave." He picked it up, studied it. And for a moment she thought he might turn it on himself, but he didn't. He stood, sagging, shrinking, and walked away without another word. The letter, she opened it that night. The letter from Maybelline, written in soft cursive, the paper still smelling faintly of lavender and cedar. "My dearest Clem, if you're reading this, it means I failed you in one way, but maybe protected you in another. I was going to run, with Josiah. Your father knew. He didn't hit me. He didn't yell. He just stopped feeding the fire. I never wanted to leave you. But I also didn't want you to grow up believing love looked like silence and fear. Josiah showed me the kind of love that plants rather than prunes. I hope someday someone does that for you, and I hope you choose not to be bitter like your father, but brave like your roots. Love always, Mama. Clementine cried until the candle burned out, and when she lay in Josiah's arms that night, she whispered she wanted to take me with her. I wasn't a burden to her. He kissed her temple. You never were. Then came the cough. It started small. Dust, Josiah said. The garden, the smoke, the rebuilding. But it didn't stop. At night, it got worse. And when Clementine touched his forehead, it burned. They didn't say the word. Not yet, but she started steeping ginger in honey, started sleeping beside him rather than just with him, started counting the seconds between coughs, and praying for them to grow further apart. The garden grew quieter. The children still came, but they didn't shout anymore. They picked gently, hushed like they were in a chapel. Clementine moved slower now, basket in hand, eyes darting back to the porch every few minutes. Listening for the cough. It came in waves, deep, wet, hard enough to shake the walls. Josiah never complained. He only smiled when she brought him tea. Just a chill, he said, but even the sunflowers started to lean. Dr. Halvers came in secret. An older man, one of the few left in town who hadn't fled justice or vanity. He examined Josiah while Clementine stood in the corner, arms wrapped tight around herself. Halvers stepped outside afterward, motioned Clementine away from the porch. It's in the lungs, he said softly, maybe from the smoke. Maybe something older, but it's rooted deep now. She didn't ask how long. She just said, fix him. The doctor's eyes dropped. I can try to ease it, but there's no cure for time. That night, Clementine climbed into bed and curled against Josiah like he was the only flame left in the world. I can't lose you, she whispered. He stroked her hair. You won't. She looked up. You're dying. We all are. She punched his shoulder, softly, but real. Don't joke. He turned to face her, their foreheads touching. Then let me live while I'm still here. The next morning, Clementine rode into town alone. Her horse, old and stubborn, snorted with every step. She posted signs outside the saloon, the post office, the bakery, even the church. Garden gathering, one night only. No hatred allowed. Wear color. Bring nothing but grace. People stared. No one spoke, but by sunset the next day, the garden glowed with lanterns strung from bean poles and flower stems. They came. Dozens of them. Some from town. Some from farms out past the ridge. Some brought pies. Others brought just silence and folded hands. Josiah sat in a chair near the garden's edge, blanket over his knees, eyes soft with disbelief. Clementine wore blue, the same blue from the old dress she mended months ago. And as dusk turned to night, she stepped onto a crate and looked out at the crowd. I used to think I was a curse, she said. I was born big, loud, too much for a small man in a smaller town. She scanned the faces. Some guilty, some proud, some unreadable. My father traded me like livestock. The town spat on me. The preacher damned me. And still, I stayed. A long pause. But you know what? She said. I stopped apologizing the day I realized I wasn't made to fit into small spaces. I was made to take up room. A few heads nodded. I fell in love with a man who never asked me to shrink, who never feared my fire, who never flinched at my scars. She turned, looking directly at Josiah. He showed me what love looks like when it grows instead of demands. Then she stepped down from the crate and did something no one expected. She danced, not like the ladies at Sunday socials. Not dainty. Not rehearsed. She spun barefoot in the dirt, arms wide, dress flaring, tears in her eyes and a laugh on her lips. The crowd fell into stillness because they didn't just see Clementine. They saw Maybelline. They saw a woman who had survived the graveyard of shame and turned it into a blooming thing. And for the first time, they cheered. Not all of them, but enough. That night, Clementine sat beside Josiah, hand in his. You see? She whispered. He nodded slowly. They saw you. She smiled through tears. No, they saw us. The night after the garden gathering, the wind shifted, warm, gentle. It carried the scent of sunflowers and ash, something beautiful and something gone. Clementine didn't sleep. She sat beside Josiah all night, their hands laced together under the quilt she'd stitched from old curtains and flour sacks. He breathed slower now, but he smiled in his sleep, like someone waiting for a train already whistling in the distance. The final sunrise. It came soft and gold. Josiah stirred just before dawn. His eyes fluttered open, the faintest smile pulling at the corner of his lips. Clementine leaned close. "Hey," she whispered. He nodded. "Barely. Still here," he rasped. "I know." "Garden?" "Full bloom." He closed his eyes again. A single tear ran from the corner. Then he said, "You danced." She laughed through her own tears. "You saw? Could have died right then." She kissed his hand. "But you waited." His voice cracked. "I wanted one more morning. One more look at your face in the light." She pressed her forehead to his. "I love you. I always did." And just before the sun crested the horizon, just before the first rooster crowed, Josiah Booker took one last breath and let it go. Clementine didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She sat with him, bathed his hands in water and rose petals, dressed him in his best shirt, wrapped his wooden sunflower carving in cloth and placed it on his chest. Then she opened every window in the shack and let the air carry his spirit through the house he helped build, the house that once held shame. Now, full of peace, there was no preacher, no casket, just a shovel, a patch of earth beside the garden, and a crowd that stretched from the porch to the road. Black, white, children, elders, even Sheriff Griggs came, hat in hand, eyes down. Clementine said the only eulogy. She read from Maybelline's letter first, then added her own words. "This man taught me that love don't need approval, that dignity don't come from birth, and that even a garden born from ash can feed 1,000 mouths." Then she lowered the box into the ground and planted sunflower seeds above it. 1 month later, she turned the shack into a school, called it the Booker Place. She taught reading, cooking, gardening, pride. She hung Josiah's sketch of his mother above the door. And every morning, before class, she read the children a line from the book she was writing. A memoir, The Garden We Were Given. One afternoon, a girl about 10, wide-eyed, soft around the middle, clearly too shy to speak, approached her after class. The girl didn't say a word, just handed Clementine a note and ran. It read, "They call me names too. They say I'm fat and slow and useless. But I saw you dance, and now I think maybe I can dance too." Clementine folded the letter and smiled. She took out her journal and began writing something she hadn't dared to before. "To the girl who thinks she's too much, you are. And that's exactly right. You were never meant to be less. You were meant to be wide and wild and soft in all the places the world forgot to touch gently. Let them stare. Let them laugh. But never let them convince you that your worth is measured by how little you take up space. I loved a man who never asked me to shrink, and when he saw me dance, I swear the earth leaned closer to watch. So dance, baby. Dance like the soil remembers you, because it does." Clementine Rosewell.